The hospital waiting room was packed with people. Nobody was paying attention to anyone else. Everyone was on their phones. Everyone was tired. Everyone was waiting. And then a teenage girl did something no one expected. She was sitting with a woman who called herself her aunt, but something was wrong. Terribly wrong. The girl had not spoken a single word since they arrived. She had not looked up, had not moved, had not asked to use the bathroom, had not touched her phone. She just sat there, completely still, hands folded in her lap. Then, without warning, she reached down and began tying her shoelaces. The nurse walking past almost missed it, but the therapy dog in the waiting room did not. The golden retriever in the red service vest had been making his rounds all morning, sitting with anxious patients, resting his head on the laps of scared children, doing what therapy dogs do. But the moment he passed that girl, he stopped. He turned around. He walked straight back to her, and he sat down directly in front of her and refused to move. Therapy dogs are trained to comfort, not to intervene, not to block, not to refuse commands. So why would this dog plant himself in front of a stranger and refuse to leave? The nurse stopped. She looked at the dog. Then she looked at the girl, and she saw it. The shoelaces. 3 loops instead of 2. Over and under. Over and under. A pattern that made no sense for tying shoes. Within 45 minutes, the entire situation in that waiting room changed forever. Stay with us, because this story will leave you speechless. Before we go further, hit that like button and subscribe right now, and drop your country in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels.
Her name was Chloe. She was 14 years old. She had brown hair that fell past her shoulders and a small scar above her left eyebrow from a bicycle accident when she was 9. She liked drawing. She liked her math teacher. She had a best friend named Avery who saved her a seat on the bus every morning. Nobody in that hospital waiting room knew any of that. To every person sitting in those plastic chairs in the Regional Medical Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, Chloe was just a quiet teenager. She sat next to a woman in a gray coat. The woman had told the front desk she was Chloe's aunt. She said Chloe had fallen at home and needed to be seen for a possible sprained wrist. She filled out the paperwork calmly. She answered every question the receptionist asked without hesitation. She smiled. She was polite. She seemed completely normal. Chloe sat beside her and said nothing. The waiting room that morning had about 30 people in it. A man with his arm in a sling, an elderly couple sharing a crossword puzzle, a mother with 2 small children, a teenage boy with headphones in, bouncing his leg nervously, and in the corner near the window, a golden retriever named Bo. Bo was 3 years old. He had been a certified therapy dog at the medical center for 14 months. His handler was a volunteer named Sandra, a retired teacher with white hair and reading glasses hanging from her neck. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, Sandra brought Bo in for a 4-hour shift. They walked the waiting rooms. They visited pediatric patients upstairs. They sat with people who were scared or in pain or just needed something warm to lean against. Bo was good at his job. He was gentle. He was calm. He read people well. Sandra said Bo knew things before she did. That morning they had already made 1 round. Bo had spent a few minutes with the elderly couple and some children. He had pressed his nose gently into the hand of a man who looked like he was about to cry. On their second pass through the room, Bo slowed down near the window. Sandra felt the leash go taut. She looked down at Bo. He had stopped in front of the row of seats and was staring at a teenage girl. Sandra gave the leash a gentle tug. "Come on, Bo." Bo did not move. He took 1 step forward toward the girl and sat down directly in front of her. Sandra apologized to the woman sitting beside the girl. She said, "Sorry, he sometimes just picks people." She gave the leash another tug. Bo looked up at Sandra. Then he looked back at the girl, and he stayed. Sandra had been volunteering with Bo for over a year. She had never seen him refuse a command. She let him be. The girl had not reacted to Bo at all, had not reached out to pet him, had not smiled, had not even looked up. Her hands were still folded in her lap. Her eyes were fixed on the middle distance, focused on nothing. The woman beside her, the one who had called herself the aunt, shifted in her seat. She placed her hand on the girl's knee and said something quietly. Sandra could not hear what she said. The girl did not respond. A nurse named Delaney came through the waiting room door at that moment to call the next patient. She saw Bo sitting in front of the girl and slowed down. Delaney had worked at that medical center for 11 years. She knew his routine. She knew his personality. She had never seen him sit like that, planted, unmoving, staring. She called her patient, but she kept one eye on Bo. 2 minutes later, she came back through the waiting room on her way to the supply room. Bo was still there, and now the girl was tying her shoes. Delaney stopped. The girl was wearing sneakers with the laces already tied, but she had untied the left one and was slowly, deliberately retying it, 3 loops. Delaney had a younger sister who had spent 2 years in an abusive relationship. Her sister told her about a self-protection technique, a signal, something you could do in public when you could not speak. Delaney stood very still. She watched the girl tie that 3rd loop. Then she walked to the nurse's station and picked up the phone. She did not call security. She called Officer Tanya Wells. Officer Wells was the community liaison officer assigned to the medical center 3 days a week. She was 41 years old. She had short, natural hair and a voice like steady rain. She had worked with survivors for most of her career. She knew how to enter a room without changing it. Officer Wells came through the waiting room door 4 minutes later in plain clothes, no uniform, no badge visible. She was carrying a clipboard like she was just another hospital staff member. She sat down 2 seats away from the girl. She did not look at her directly. She looked at her clipboard. Then quietly, barely above a whisper, she said one sentence, "You can keep tying your shoes if you need to." The girl's hands went still. Then very slowly, without turning her head, the girl tied a 4th loop. Officer Wells stood up. She walked to the woman in the gray coat and asked her to come with her for a moment regarding some paperwork. Her tone was completely calm, completely routine. The woman stood. She looked at the girl. She said, "I will be right back." The moment the woman turned the corner, the girl looked up. She looked directly at Bo, and then she started to cry. Not loud, not dramatic, completely silent, tears running down her face while Bo put his front paws on the seat beside her. He pressed his head against her shoulder. Sandra sat down next to her and put her arm around her and said nothing, just held her. It took 3 minutes for Officer Wells to confirm what she already knew. The woman in the gray coat was not Chloe's aunt. Chloe had been reported missing from her home in Morristown, Tennessee 6 days earlier. She had been taken. The woman was apprehended in the corridor before she reached the exit. Chloe was reunited with her parents 4 hours later. Her mother arrived at the medical center and ran down the hallway and did not stop running until she had her daughter in her arms. Chloe's father stood in the doorway and could not speak. He just stood there with his hand over his mouth and tears running down his face. Later, when asked how she had known to use the shoelace signal, Chloe said she had seen it in a video someone shared in her school. She said she had memorized it because it seemed like something that could never happen to her, but you never know. She said the hardest part was staying still long enough and calm enough to do it. She said the only reason she could was because of the dog. She said when Bo sat down in front of her, she knew someone was paying attention. She said it gave her enough courage to move her hands. Bo received a citation from the Knoxville Police Department. A small ceremony was held at the medical center. He sat very still while the chief of police placed a small medal on his vest, and he wagged his tail exactly once. Sandra cried the entire time. Delaney, the nurse who had made the call, gave a short interview to a local news station. She said she almost did not stop. She said she almost kept walking. She said she thinks about that every day. Officer Wells said in her statement that the shoelace signal is real and that every person who works in a public space should know what 3 loops means. The story was shared 44 million times in 72 hours. School districts in 9 states added the signal to their safety curriculum. Chloe went back to school 6 weeks later. Avery saved her seat on the bus.